In 1927, Central High School in Muncie, Indiana, wasn't just a school. It was a vault of secrets. For nearly 100 years, two unsolved deaths have clung to its walls like ghosts. A teenage boy forgotten before his body was even cold. An old painter found dead in a vat of chemicals, his corpse pickled like a lab specimen. The press called them the boy nobody missed and the pickled painter. The police called them accidents. But accidents don't leave this many questions. So what really happened here? Was it bad luck or something worse? Tonight, we walk into the dark, into a story where the truth might be just out of reach. Let's go back to the 1920s. Central High School stood like a castle in Muncie, towering stone arches, creaking wooden stairs, classrooms lit by weak winter sun. By day, students filled these halls. They memorized math formulas. They passed notes. They had no idea the building around them was already keeping secrets. Because Central High wasn't just a school. It was a silent witness, a place where shadows clung to corners, and whispers lingered in empty stairwells. By 1928, those shadows would grow darker. Two strange deaths, two stories that didn't add up, and a question that still hangs in the air. How do you solve a mystery when even the walls refuse to talk? October 15th, 1927, third period algebra class. 16 students bent over their desks, scratching numbers onto paper. The air smelled like chalk dust and pencil lead. At the front of the room, Pearlie Gelsby-Hogg, a quiet 15-year-old with a mop of brown hair, suddenly slumped forward. His pencil rolled off the desk, hit the floor, and before anyone could ask if he was okay, he was gone. The teacher screamed. A student ran for the principal, but by the time the doctor arrived, Pearlie's body was already cold. Cause of death? Acute indigestion, a fancy term for a stomachache that killed a boy in minutes. But here's where the story twists. No one came for Pearlie, not his parents, not his friends, if he had any. The school buried him in a potter's field, a grave for the nameless. No headstone, no flowers, just a patch of dirt. So let's ask the hard questions. Who was Pearlie Gelsby-Hogg? The records are thin. He lived in a boarding house a few blocks from the school, worked odd jobs after class to pay rent. No siblings, no photos, just a name in a yearbook, circled by someone who'd later cross it out. And his death, the indigestion story, it doesn't add up. Acute indigestion doesn't make you bleed from the mouth. It doesn't leave bruises on your arms. At least, that's what the janitor swore he saw when he carried Pearlie's body to the infirmary. But the doctor wrote it off. The principal shrugged. The police? They never opened a case. Why? Because Pearlie was inconvenient. A boy with no family to demand answers. No one to protest when the school scrubbed his desk clean the very next day. But let's dig deeper. In 1927, Muncie was a town of factories and church socials. A place where people took care of their own, unless you weren't one of their own. Pearlie wasn't born here. He'd arrived a year earlier. Alone, a drifter, a shadow, the kind of kid people pretended not to see. And after he died, they kept not seeing him. The local newspaper gave the story 3 lines on page 6. Student dies in class. Funeral arrangements pending. But there were no arrangements. No funeral. Just a pine box lowered into the ground while the rest of Muncie ate Sunday supper. But here's the thing about secrets, they rot. And rot leaves a stain. Years later, a former classmate told a reporter, "We all knew something was wrong, but nobody wanted to get involved." Another student claimed Pearlie had been coughing blood for weeks, that he'd begged the school nurse for help. But she'd sent him back to class. Was it poison? Tuberculosis? Or something crueler, neglect? The truth is, we'll never know. The nurse's records burned in a fire. The doctor's notes vanished. Even the boarding house where Pearlie lived was torn down in the 50s. All that's left is a question. How does a child die in a room full of people and become a ghost before he's even buried? Maybe the answer's in the name they gave him. the boy nobody missed. A label that tells us more about Muncie than it does about Pearlie. Because when a town forgets a boy, it's not just a tragedy, it's a choice. But choices have consequences. To this day, visitors to Muncie's Potter's Field say they've seen a figure sitting by the unmarked graves, a boy in a threadbare sweater, scribbling numbers in the dirt, waiting for someone, anyone, to solve the equation he left behind. Let's talk about indifference. In 1927, Central High had 423 students. 422 went home that October afternoon. One did not. Yet in the days that followed, there were no vigils, no memorials, no tearful teachers, just silence. The school didn't close for the day. The algebra test scheduled for October 16th? It happened. Students sharpened their pencils in the same room where Pearlie had died. They stepped over the floorboards he'd collapsed on. Life moved on. But why? Maybe because Pearlie was poor. Maybe because he was an outsider. Or maybe because admitting the truth, that a boy could die violently, suspiciously, in a place meant to protect him, was too terrifying. So they buried the story with the body. But let's follow the crumbs. In 1998, a historian digging through old Muncie police logs found a curious entry dated October 16th, 1927. An officer had been called to Central High the day after Pearlie's death. The reason? Disturbance in the chemistry lab. No details. No follow-up. Just those 6 words. What's in a chemistry lab? Chemicals. Acids. Poisons. Was someone cleaning up evidence? Or was Pearlie's death linked to something darker in the school's underbelly? We'll never know. But here's another twist. 3 weeks after Pearlie died, the school janitor quit, packed his family, and left Muncie in the middle of the night. His granddaughter, interviewed in 2003, claimed he'd told her, "That school was cursed. Saw things I couldn't forget." What things? He took that answer to his grave. And then there's the rumor of the letter. In 1962, an anonymous envelope arrived at the Muncie Evening Press. Inside was a faded note. Handwritten, "They killed the boy." It wasn't sickness. The postmark? Indianapolis. The writing? Shaky, like someone old or afraid. The letter vanished from the newsroom archives. Another dead end. But let's return to Pearlie. A boy dies alone. A town erases him. Why does this story claw at us a century later? Because it's not just about Pearlie. It's about every person who's ever been ignored. Every voice that's been silenced. Every life treated as disposable. Today, Central High is a crumbling shell. Its halls echo with the ghosts of students long gone. But if you stand very still in the old algebra classroom, locals say you can still hear it, the sound of a pencil hitting the floor. A reminder that some mysteries refuse to stay buried. And Pearlie Gelsby Hogg? He's more than a name in a dusty yearbook. He's a question, a challenge, a mirror held up to all of us. Who deserves to be remembered? Maybe the answer starts by saying his name, out loud. Here, now, Pearlie Gelsby Hogg, 15 years old. Gone, but not forgotten. Not anymore. One year after Pearlie Hogg's death, Central High School had a new problem. This one smelled like chemicals and secrets. October 1928. The school's clock tower, a crumbling relic even then, needed repairs. So they hired a 72-year-old painter named Nelson Dull, a quiet man with stained hands and a limp. His job, restore the tower's faded murals, give it back its glory. But Nelson didn't finish the job. Instead, they found him floating in a vat of acid. Not a fall, not a heart attack, a vat of corrosive chemicals, tucked in the tower's shadow. His body, oddly preserved, skin like wax, eyes wide open. The newspapers had a field day. The pickled painter of Muncie. But let's rewind. Nelson Dull wasn't just a painter. He was a World War I veteran, a widower, a man who talked to his brushes like they were old friends. He'd been working alone in that tower for weeks. Students swore they'd seen him hauling buckets of strange liquids up the stairs. For the paint, he'd say, but the school never ordered chemicals. Then, on the morning of October 23rd, A janitor smelled something sharp, metallic, like rotten eggs and burnt hair. He followed the stench to a storage room and found Nelson. The vat was 5 feet tall, iron, rusted at the edges, filled with a frothing, greenish liquid. Nelson's body bobbed in it, pale and stiff. His overalls melted to his skin, but his face, perfectly intact, almost peaceful. The coroner called it an accident, said Nelson must have slipped while mixing solvents. But here's the problem. That vat wasn't there the day before. So how'd it get there? And why was Nelson in it? Let's pick apart the lies. First, the chemicals. The police claimed it was a cleaning solution. But cleaning solutions don't dissolve flesh in hours. A chemist from Indianapolis later guessed it was a mix of sulfuric acid and lye, the kind used in factories, not schools. Second, Nelson's ladder. It stood upright, untouched, next to the vat. No signs of a slip, no splash marks on the floor, almost like he'd been placed inside. Third, the clock. Nelson's co-workers said he'd been obsessed with the tower's gears. They're wrong, he'd mutter. The time's all wrong. The day he died, the clock stopped at exactly 3:15 a.m. But here's the darkest twist. Nelson's toolbox vanished. So did his journals. The police shrugged. Case closed in a week. But the people of Muncie talked. Some said Nelson had found something in the tower. Old blueprints, a hidden room, maybe even proof of what happened to Pearly Hog the year before. Others whispered that the school board wanted the tower's flaws hidden, and Nelson knew too much. Then there's the rumor about the janitor, the same one who found Pearly's body. He quit days after Nelson's death, packed his family and left town. His son later told a reporter, Dad said the tower was cursed, said he heard voices in the walls, voices counting down. But the wildest theory? That Nelson wasn't dead. A groundskeeper swore he saw Nelson 2 days after the funeral, standing in the tower window, staring down at the school. When he blinked, the figure was gone. The truth? It's buried under layers of time and rust. But let's follow the clues. In 1934, a demolition crew found a locked compartment in the clock tower. Inside, a single paintbrush, a rusted pocket watch, and a photo of Pearly Hog's algebra class. Nelson's initials were carved into the back. Why did he have that photo? What did he see in those young faces? We'll never know. The photo disappeared. In 1972, a night watchman at the abandoned school called the police. He'd heard clanging in the tower, found the vat still there, still filled with murky liquid, and floating in it, a pair of overalls, size large, Nelson's size. The cops dismissed it as a prank, but the watchman quit the next day. And then there's the letter. In 1988, an anonymous note arrived at the Muncie Star-Press. One sentence. He painted the truth. They couldn't let it dry. The handwriting matched the 1962 letter about Pearly Hog. Another dead end. But let's ask the obvious. Why kill an old painter? Maybe because painters notice things. They see cracks in walls, symbols under layers of paint. Maybe Nelson found something in that tower, something that linked 2 deaths a year apart, something worth killing for. Or maybe it was simpler. Maybe Nelson Dull was just inconvenient, a man with no family, no power, the perfect person to vanish. But vanish? No. Nelson's story refuses to die. In 2001, a group of urban explorers broke into the abandoned school. They took photos of the tower. In one shot, a shadow looms over the vat. A tall, thin figure, holding a brush. A trick of the light? Probably. But then why did their camera batteries die all at once? And why did one explorer later claim, it smelled like chemicals in there, like something sour, the pickled painter, a man preserved in acid and mystery. But here's what keeps me up at night. Nelson Dull was restoring a mural of Muncie's founding fathers. The day he died, he'd painted over one figure's face, replaced it with a skull, a joke, a warning, or a clue. The school painted over it the next morning. But in 2017, during a rainstorm, the mural's colors bled through. For one night, the skull reappeared, grinning. They tore the mural down the next day. Coincidence? Maybe. But in a town like Muncie, where two unsolved deaths linger like fog. Maybe there's no such thing. So what's the answer? Was Nelson Dull a victim of bad luck? A man in the wrong place? Wrong time? Or did he peel back the wallpaper of this town and find something rotten underneath? The files are closed. The witnesses are gone. All that's left is the vat, rusting in the dark, waiting. And if you listen close, you can still hear the clock ticking. 3:15 a.m. The hour time stood still. 2 deaths. 1 school. 0 answers. Let's lay out the facts. In 1927, a boy dies violently in class. No investigation. No mourners. A year later, an old painter is found pickled in acid. Case closed in days. Both men forgotten. Both stories buried. Coincidence? Or is there a thread connecting them? Hidden in Central High's bones? Let's start with the obvious. Pearlie Hogg and Nelson Dull had nothing in common. One was a teenage drifter. The other, a retired veteran. But they shared 2 things: bad timing and Central High School. Pearlie dies in a classroom. Nelson dies in the shadow of the clock tower. Both locations linked by a single corridor, a hallway that, in 1928, was lined with lockers and whispers. But here's where it gets strange. The janitor who found both bodies quit days after Nelson's death. Left town. Never spoke of it again. His replacement lasted 3 weeks. Said the school felt wrong, that the walls breathed. Then there's the chemistry lab. Pearlie's class was next door. The day after his death, police were called there for a disturbance. No report filed. Nelson, meanwhile, died near a vat of acid, chemicals the school never ordered, chemicals that melted flesh. What if these weren't accidents? What if they were cleanups? Let's dig deeper. In 1927, Central High's principal was Harold Vickery, a man known for 2 things: his slick-back hair and his talent for making problems disappear. When Pearlie died, Vickery shut down questions fast. Tragic accident. He told the papers, let the boy rest. But when Nelson died a year later, Vickery did the same, called it a freak mishap. Retired 6 months later, moved to Florida, died in a boating accident. His diary? Burned by his family. Convenient. Then there's the clock tower. Nelson was hired to restore it. But locals say he wasn't just painting, he was searching. For what? Maybe the same thing Pearlie stumbled onto. Because in Nelson's hidden compartment, they found a photo of Pearlie's algebra class. Why would a painter care about a dead student? Unless he knew something. And let's talk about the chemicals. Sulfuric acid. Lye. The same substances used to dissolve evidence. To erase people. Was Nelson's vat a tool? A threat? A warning to anyone who asked too many questions? Here's another thread. In 1926, a year before Pearlie's death, Central High's chemistry teacher quit abruptly, moved to Chicago, changed his name. His grandson claims he'd received a letter before leaving. 1 sentence: stay silent, or you'll end up like the others. What others? We don't know. But in 1929, a fire destroyed the school's records office. Only 1 file survived, a maintenance log noting unusual stains in the algebra classroom, dated October 14th, 1927, 1 day before Pearlie died. Stains, chemicals, a boy bleeding from the mouth. Put it together. And then there's the whispers. Students in the 1930s claimed they heard footsteps in empty halls. Teachers joked about Nelson's ghost rattling the clocks. But in 1955, a night watchman swore he saw 2 figures in the tower, a boy and an old man, pointing at the mural Nelson painted. The one with the skull, a skull that bled through the paint decades later. Symbols matter. So what's the truth? Option 1, 2 random tragedies. A sick boy, a clumsy painter, a town too busy to care. Option 2, something rotten in Central High, a secret worth killing for. Maybe money, maybe a crime, maybe something darker. But let's play detective. Pearlie Hogg dies. No autopsy, no family. Nelson Dull, a man with no ties, takes a job at the same school. Dies in a vat that shouldn't exist. The janitor flees. The principal vanishes. Files burn. This isn't a coincidence. It's a pattern. And patterns need people. People to orchestrate. People to hide. Who? The school board? A teacher? The police? In 1928, Muncie's mayor was Arthur Blythe. His brother-in-law owned a chemical plant, a plant that donated supplies to Central High, the same plant that made sulfuric acid, a year after Nelson's death. That plant won a contract to renovate the school's plumbing, a job that involved tearing up floors and pouring new concrete. What were they hiding under those floors? We'll never know. The plant closed in 1931. The owner died in a fire. More coincidences. But here's the kicker. In 2004, a construction crew digging near the old school found a metal box. Inside, a rusted pocket watch, a paintbrush, and a note. The handwriting matches Nelson Dulce. It reads, "They killed the boy. I found the proof. Don't trust the clocks." The watch's hands are frozen. At 3:15, the same time the tower clock stopped when Nelson died. Proof. Maybe. But the box vanished. City Hall claims it never existed. Of course. So where does that leave us? With two graves, one unmarked, one holding a man pickled in lies, with a school that's now a shell, its walls still whispering, with a truth that's maddeningly close, but out of reach. Maybe the answer's in the details. The janitor who heard voices counting down, the photo of Pearlie's class in Nelson's compartment, the recurring stench of chemicals, the clock forever stuck at 3:15. Or maybe the answer's simpler. Maybe some places are born bad. Maybe Central High was a monster, hungry and forgotten, feeding on the unlucky, the ignored, the ones nobody would miss. But monsters need keepers. Who fed this one? The police who looked away? The principal who buried reports? The town that chose silence? Or all of them? Here's what I think. Pearlie Hogg saw something he shouldn't have. A secret. A crime. Maybe in that chemistry lab. Maybe in the halls. He died for it. Nelson Dull? He found Pearlie's secret while scraping paint in the tower. And he died for it too. Their deaths weren't accidents. They were messages. Stop digging. But we're still digging. Because the clock's still ticking. The chemicals still smell. And the walls? They're still whispering. Listen. Central High School closed its doors in 1973. The students left. The teachers retired. The clock stopped. But Pearlie Hogg and Nelson Dull? They stayed. Because unsolved mysteries don't fade, they fester. They become ghosts. And ghosts don't need doors to haunt you. Think about it. Why do we care about two deaths from a century ago? A boy and an old man. Forgotten by their own town? Because their stories aren't about them anymore. They're about us. Every time we say Pearlie's name, we're asking, who decides who matters? A boy dies in a room full of people, and the world looks away. A painter drowns in acid, and we call it an accident. These aren't just failures of justice. They're failures of humanity. And Central High? It's more than a building. It's a graveyard of choices. The choice to ignore, to bury, to pretend. But here's the thing about secrets. They don't stay buried. They rise. They whisper. They claw at the floorboards of history until someone listens. In 1992, a historian found a diary in a Muncie attic. Its owner? A girl who sat next to Pearlie in algebra class. One entry reads, "He asked me for a pencil that morning. I said no. Now I hear that pencil roll every night in my dreams. Guilt outlives us all." And Nelson Dull? His legacy isn't a mural or a restored clock. It's a question. What happens when you speak truth to a town that wants to stay deaf? They'll pickle your story in lies. They'll melt your voice in acid. But they can't erase the echo. That's why we keep digging. Not for answers, there are none left. But for the reckoning. For the chance to say, "We see you now." To drag these shadows into the light. Because history isn't just written by the winners. It's written by the ones who refuse to let the lost stay lost. In 2015, a teacher brought her class to Central High's ruins. A student tripped on a loose floorboard. Underneath, a pencil, charred, broken, no name on it. But we know, Pearlie's lost pencil. The student took it home, put it on her desk. She says sometimes, at night, it rolls toward the edge, like it's trying to finish the equation he started. And Nelson? His vat's still there, rusted, rotting, but if you lean close, locals swear you'll smell it, acid and oil paint. A warning, a reminder. So why can't we let go? Because these aren't ghost stories. They're accountability. Every time we repeat Pearlie and Nelson's names, we're refusing to be the town that forgets. We're choosing to be the ones who say, no, you don't get to disappear. The truth is, we'll never solve these cases. The witnesses are dead. The evidence is dust. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is to stand in Central High's ruins and whisper, I see you, to the boy who died alone, to the painter who vanished in plain sight, to every soul history tried to erase. See them, say their names, and let that be the answer. Pulley Gels by Hogg. Nelson Dull, you are not forgotten. Not today. Not ever. So, do you believe in ghosts? Not the ones in stories. Not the ones that rattle chains or slam doors. I'm talking about the ghosts that live in the silences. The ones made of questions nobody answered. Secrets nobody claimed. Muncie's got 2 of them. One haunts a patch of dirt in Potter's Field. No headstone. No flowers. Just a boy who bled out in a classroom while the world looked the other way. His ghost doesn't scream. It whispers. In the creak of a desk. In the scratch of a pencil. A voice asking, why did no one see me? The other floats in a chemical haze. An old man with paint-stained hands, preserved in acid and apathy. His ghost lingers in the smell of rust and rot, in the stuck hands of a broken clock. A voice rasping, why did they bury the truth? You don't need to visit Central High to hear them. Just listen. Listen to the way your breath catches when you say their names. Pulley Hogg, Nelson Dull. Listen to the stories that don't add up. The boy who vanished from memory, the painter who dissolved into myth. And ask yourself, what's worse? A ghost or a town that became one? Because Muncie's real haunting isn't in its abandoned halls. It's in the weight of all those unanswered questions. The ones that fester in attic diaries and dusty police logs. The ones that keep historians awake at 3:15 a.m., staring at shadows. So here's the challenge. Next time you walk past an old building, any building, ask what it's hiding. Ask who it's buried. Because history isn't just written by the living. It's written by the dead we refuse to forget. Pearlie and Nelson's ghosts aren't asking for vengeance. They're asking for the one thing they were denied, witness. For someone to stand in the dark and say, I hear you. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe tonight. When the house is quiet, you'll hear it, the soft roll of a pencil across the floor, the tick of a clock that shouldn't work, a whisper in your ear, who killed us? You don't have to answer. But if you do, they're listening.